Hey guys, Darren Kelly, coach of Watch Pods, and welcome back to another episode of the AFL Fantasy 2025 preseason content on my channel. On today's episode, we finally get to review some footy as footy is officially back. We had the first look of some practice matches over the weekend, so we're going to get straight into those and review them now. So before I get straight into the practice matches that I want to review in today's episode, which is going to be 6 games with a couple inter-club matches that I want to talk about real quick as well, I really want to talk about what we're mainly taking out of these practice matches. You know, ideally, we're not really just going in with the full thinking that, okay, if the player plays well in a practice match, then they're in our team, right? There's a lot of different factors that we need to think about. And the main thing that I'm really looking at is when I'm looking at a primo, it's really checking that they're fully fit, they're moving freely, they're really just ticking over the legs. I'm not really looking for scoring output or anything like that. I just really want to check that they're all fit, looking, ready to hit the season again and ready to go. But when you're looking at other players like your mid prices and your underpriced primos, you really just want to confirm, you want to have some idea on the role, which is not always easier said than done, right? Like, there's a lot of different factors with teams not always putting out their best 22 in practice matches. Tigers are a great example of that over the weekend. They probably had half of their senior side out of the team, so it makes it really hard to determine, okay, what's the roles they're actually going to be playing. So you want to try and determine what roles they got playing, and that's where you need to have that sort of footy background, that IQ behind you to understand, okay, this and this player are out. This is where they would be ideally, and this player would not be there if that was the case. So you really got to have the IQ behind you in terms of what's happening off the field as well as on the field. The other thing that I like to ignore, I guess, is I don't like to look at fantasy points too much. I think it's pretty irrelevant. Like, again, there's a lot of players out at this time of the year. Like I said, most of the senior guys that are really just out there ticking their legs over, so it means the intensity really isn't as high as it would normally be in an AFL game. So that means there's minimal tackles laid throughout these games because, again, they don't want to hurt anyone before the actual game starts, and that means a lot of the outside guys get a lot of the ball, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And a lot of the time, you really just want to look at the first half of these games because that's really where the most likely scenario of the teams lining up is going to be. Because in the second half, they usually just throw in the B squad and they're ticking over the legs of those other guys, and they try a few different things. So it's not always the most spot on view in my terms of view. So I like to just focus on the first half where their lineup is pretty much close to what it's going to be like when it comes to round 1 if they have a full squad. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about before we get into the games is that if you were not able to watch these games live, I would highly recommend you go back and watch them. All the 6 games that we're going to be talking about today were free, and are able to be replayed somewhere on the internet. So please go check them out. It just gives you a much better insight than what I can portray over a YouTube video or what anyone else can do over a YouTube video. So you may pick up on certain things that I missed out on. I haven't watched it a second time and I don't plan to. But if you can watch it and you can pick up on certain things that maybe I didn't pick up on, and that gives you a leg up on the competition that you might pick up something up that no one else did. So please go back and watch them. I highly recommend it, and it's going to give you the best output on fantasy to start the season. So to start off, I really wanted to quickly touch on the Crows inter-club match. So they had a surprise, I guess it was a little bit of a surprise, but not really. The other day, I wasn't fully expecting it, but they live streamed their inter-club match on the Friday afternoon, so that was quite pleasant. I got to watch that live. So this sort of answered a lot of questions for us in terms of Adelaide Crows and what they're doing, particularly around their midfield, right? We've had a lot of those questions about, well, who's going to run through there because they have so many guys that can do it at the moment. And from, I guess, the main takeaway from that video, just in a short summary, is that the main midfield group is going to be Crouch, Dawson, and then you're going to throw Peatling, and then probably a Rankin in there. Even though Rankin didn't play particularly in this game because of the All-Stars match, we know what his role has been in the past, and we have known what his role is going to be, throughout the match simulations, throughout the preseason. He's predominantly playing as mostly a midfielder, but also going to be playing a bit as a forward, as we've known. So he's going to run through there, and that sort of leads into Draper a little bit. He played as sort of that fourth midfielder in this game, so that throws up a few questions about marks about what his role is going to be to start the season. But I do think he's a lock for best 22. He looked absolutely amazing out there. Just did quite a few things. And I did want to quickly show you some of the fantasy scores that are circulating around the fantasy community at the moment. If you didn't know, please go check out X. There's plenty of fantasy scores all over the fantasy community. The ones I'm particularly looking at here is from AFL Fantasy Enigma. Please, if you haven't checked them out already, please do so. They are just doing God's work at the moment this preseason by providing all the fantasy stats for us. Kick-ins, CBAs, ruck contests, all that sort of stuff. All over Twitter, so please go check them out and give them a follow if you're interested. But I'll be showing a fair bit of their stuff today, just as a bit of a presentation, I guess, because there's not a whole lot else I can really show you in terms of these matches. So Dawson did pretty well. Draper, sorry, did pretty well, 42, and this is only in the first half. I must say, in the second half they mixed it up a fair bit and played like a much stronger second team to mix it up and make it a bit more competitive, because the A team was getting pretty much on top of the game and they were winning by like 60 odd points. So they had to make it a bit more competitive and throw the numbers around a little bit. So that probably shows that their depth probably isn't quite there yet to be, challenging for the top of the ladder. But that's relevant to fantasy anyway. So Draper, I'm really keen on still. I think he's best 22, like I said. I think he'll be around that mark in terms of being around the midfield. I just want to see it with the likes of Rankin back in the practice match against Port on Friday this week, where he sort of plays. Hopefully Rankin does play and we can get a better visualization on what he does. So that's one to keep an eye on. But from from what I saw, he absolutely killed it, and he has the potential to be a pretty good scorer for us and be a pretty good footy player for the Adelaide Crows. I guess I should go back to the top then, and that would start with Jordan Dawson. I think I've got a lot more confidence now this year with Dawson. At the start of the season, the preseason particularly, was that we didn't really know what to think of Jordan Dawson, because he did spend a bit of time forward last season, particularly in the back half where they were struggling a little bit with scoring power. But they had no issues with that in this practice match. All three of their tall forwards and Tex, Fogarty, and Thilthorpe are all fit, and they're all played in this game. Then they even had Curtin go through there, which I can touch on now. He looks like a gun at this point in time. He's a much bigger body than I originally thought. He's like 196, and he just knows how to get up, and he's got a big body, so he's going to play as that sort of fourth tall, I think, for them particularly. So that's what he did in this practice match anyway. So he just got plenty of it being up there. I think he kicked 3 goals in this match simulation, playing against the B squad, so it wasn't anything amazing, but definitely has gone up against decent opponents. So I like what he can do there, and he does have that aerobic capacity to run through the midfield, which we did see a bit later in the fourth quarter. So I'm pretty bullish on starting him as a bench rookie. But back to Dawson, I have a lot more confidence that he's going to be a mainstay midfielder and can potentially go back to being his 110 average this season. So I'm putting his name back in the calculations as a premium starting pick, whereas previously I had written him off. He does have a really nice run, so it does put his name quite up there in terms of the calculations for that. So just something to think about when, if you're starting a primo midfielder, you're talking about Bond, you're talking about Brayshaw, then Dawson should absolutely be in your calculations, because he's got that role now. We've got the confirmation that he's going to be a mainstay midfielder, and we've seen what he's able to do in that role. So he was just demanding the ball and being that Jordan Dawson pick that we all know he can be, bringing a great overhead mark, and being quite a tackling beast as well. Didn't see a huge amount of tackles in this game because, again, it is practice match. We don't see too many of those, and you are playing against your teammates. You don't want to injure them. So I wanted to put his name out there to say that I'm a lot more confident in him this season now. The other one, I guess I should talk about Matty Crouch real quick. He was on fire to start the first quarter. He was absolutely everywhere, racking up, just getting plenty of disposals and getting some +6s around the ground as well. Again, the intensity probably wasn't as high as what it should have been and what it will be in AFL fantasy. So, AFL in the AFL season. So, I don't think it's one I'm keen on. I think it's priced at like 102, so I don't think it's really worth it that much. I don't see him going much better to push into the top 8, 10 of the midfielders, so it's probably a pass through for me. The one that obviously we're all keeping an eye on is James Peatling. And we sort of had the inkling that before this practice match is that he was going to play like a 50-50 role on the wing and the CBAs. But in this match, he purely played as a pure midfielder, pretty much. He didn't leave CBAs much at all. He may have spent 1 or 2 on the half forward or the wing, but predominantly he was a midfielder, and that was awesome to see. And that pretty much means he's a lock in my side. He scored the 41 in the half that they played before switching over. Scored the 30 points in the first quarter, so he definitely has plenty of fantasy output as we've seen at his GWS days. So I am much more confident on picking a Peatling down at his price at 62, I believe it is. Yeah, 62. So give him a tick mark, give him a shining star, whatever you want to do, to say that okay, now if he can put a couple more together, then you just lock him in your side. That's the way I like to do things. I like to just give him a little tick mark or a little green arrow in my spreadsheets here and there to say that okay, they did well in this practice match, and if I get all greens, then I can just slot him in my side, and it helps me remove a few players here and there because we can end up with quite a few players that could end up on our side. So really bullish on what Peatling could do. The other one that a lot of people were interested in was Isaac Cumming, also from GWS. He was a little bit disappointing. Well, I should say a lot disappointing. Only scored the 27 points in the first half. He was very quiet on the wing, and he just didn't look like he was moving freely. Like he was plodding around, wasn't really trying. And that could be the fact that, he is going to be best 22 for them no matter what, and he is possibly overcoming that injury still a little bit, his hamstring injury that he had early on in the preseason. So I won't write him off just yet, but I think it really limits his upside when he's playing a predominantly wing role at this point in time. He really didn't spend much time down back at all. So that really limits his upside, in my opinion, from, potentially being a 90 guy down to probably only being a 70 guy, which when he's priced at 57 or 56, around about there, 14 points upside probably isn't enough at that price range. I could probably just pick a rookie and they could do a 70 output quite simply. So I don't think it's enough output for me. So I have removed him from my side at this point in time. I did say in my team review I wasn't super happy with him, so it didn't take much for him to be removed. So just I put a red arrow next to him, or something like that. So not super keen on what he's producing at the moment, but I will watch and see what he does in the next couple of games. A few others I should quickly touch on is Laird. Really was disappointing as well. Down on the halfback, really wasn't the one demanding the ball. So I think we can write him off as a starting pick, and I'm not quite sure if he's going to be one that even comes into our calculations later in the year when he does pick up defender status, because it didn't really look like he was wanting to be there or even wanting to get the ball. So I'm not 100% sure what his output's going to be this season. We'll have to wait and see. The only one I'll quickly touch on as well is Soligo. The question mark around the whole midfield mix really cemented around Soligo, and he really opened up that question because he played predominantly as a wingman in this game, so it probably shows you that Soligo is now going to play as a wing, and this opens up the midfield mix to be these, Dawsons and Crouches and your Peatlings and such. So that is a big positive, and we got a lot more answers in this. So that was really informative to actually watch. So if you haven't watched it, please go back and watch it. It was quite nice to do. So that does it for the Crows. The next one I wanted to touch on was North Melbourne. And I did only watch this one recently because I completely did not catch it at the time. But um, I guess we start at the top, and that is Harry Sheezel. He is just a gun, and he is dominating in CBAs at this point in time. Uh, didn't play as a full time mid, but had some rotations as a half forward and pushed into the stoppages. So it wasn't like a deep forward pocket forward player like you could have thought he would be. So I'm I think we need to recalculate on what our thoughts are with Sheezel because it's stupid to think that he has potential upside at his 112 price to be able to go more than that. You know, he's going to be around the ball a lot more often than he was at halfback, even though the ball did live in their back half quite a fair bit when he was that halfback distributor. Maybe not as many plus sixes, but he can get his hands on the ball a lot more and get those, you know, 1-2s quite frequently. And he did this a lot in this game. So I I think he stays pretty consistent in terms of what his fantasy output would be, and I definitely think I need to recalculate in terms of starting him as a pick. You know, with a lot of other guys back there being uncertain, you know, Sinclair's now injured. Does Zorko regress? Does a Whitfield regress? What's Nick Martin doing? You got all these sort of guys that are probably and more likely going to decline. Does Sheezel potentially have a bit of upside in him because he's got a better role that he's going to be around the ball a bit more often? Now, I don't want to glaze him too much as a, you know, because it was an internal game and he was playing against the B side. It wasn't super intense and it did allow him to get plenty of points. He wasn't being tagged like we all know he will be at some stage. So there will be some down games for him. But in terms of their midfield mix, I think I'll quickly touch on that. It was LDU, Sheezel, Parker, and Powell being the main mix, being the main first guys that were in there. It really looked like Powell sort of took that George Wardlaw role where originally we thought it would be Parker. So you can see Parker's score way down here at 34. Probably means that we can write him off now, in my opinion. Even though he is 34 or 33 or somewhere around there, he could just be ticking over the legs, and we could see a bit of a bump when he, you know, plays in round one. I just don't think there's going to be. We need to see some evidence if he's going to be priced at 82 and we want him to be our F1. So we really want to see something in the preseason, and this is one of the two games that we're going to see. So if he's only hitting at 50% rate, it doesn't give me a huge amount of confidence to start him at F1. So for that reason, I've probably pretty much crossed him off at this point in time, but I will continue to watch next week. But back to Power. I really wish he had that defender status because he was probably pretty close playing, you know, mostly that defensive half game style back in the last season. He would have been a much nicer pick, priced at 82. He's just so pricey as a pure midfielder, and I think there's a lot of other guys that we would pick up before him. So for those sort of reasons, I don't think I could pick Power, especially because it's only short term. As much as he could be, you know, a bit of a cash generator for us, he could potentially average, you know, 90 or a 95 in that position. I just don't know if it's going to be enough to say that, okay, let's jump on him to start the season, then trade him out when George Wardlaw comes back and decide and assumingly tapes that position back off of him. Whether that pushes the Power back to the fourth midfielder and then Park out of the midfield mixes altogether, it's hard to say. And you've also got Simpkin come back in the side. He missed due to the All-Stars game. So that's another factor that we're going to consider. So there's so much going through that midfield that it's hard to sort of just decipher what's going on. But from my eyes, it looked like LDU, Sheezel, Powell, and Parker will be the main guys to start the season. So definitely something to consider there. Cherry was the other one that just ticked over the legs. You know, he only played the 3/4, did enough to just say, okay, I'm good to go. Looked like he moved freely, did a few nice things around the ground, took a few clunks here and there, and even kicked a nice goal. So, you know, scoring 76 in three quarters of the game, you know, on track for 100 there. And it was a preseason game, so it wasn't the tackling festival that you'd expect from a Cherry like we've seen in the past. So I think he only had 2 or 3 tackles in this game, so you'd expect that to be much more ferocious when it comes to the real thing. So that bumps him up probably 10 or 12 points quite easily. So he just probably didn't want to hurt his teammates because we know he can hurt a pretty big person pretty quickly. So I think he did enough to get a pass mark and just say that he can lock him in our sides if he again performs in the community series. Caleb Daniels, one I probably should have talked about off the top, and he's just an absolute lock. I don't think I need to convince anyone that much. So he just confirmed what we all thought, that he's going to be the main kick-in taker at North Melbourne. He's got the demand to get the ball off halfback and be that main distributor, like a Sheasel has been in the past and McKercher last year. So he's got that absolutely prime role, and he just looked like he had the thirst for it. It didn't take much to convince you that, okay, this guy's going to be a fantasy gun for us, because whenever he didn't have the ball in his hands and the ball was within a 20-meter vicinity from him, he's calling for the ball every second. He's leading, he's uh, running into space to try and get the ball off these guys. So he's providing plenty of plus sixes back there as being that quarterback, as an escape kick, and he's also doing plenty of 1-2s out of the kick-ins. Kick into like a Brad Scott or whatever, not a Brad Scott, a Bailey Scott, and then handballing it back to him to get another kick into the midfield. So I'm loving what he's doing. It's so hard to deny that he's going to be an absolute gun for us. Price down at 50 is ridiculous. He's definitely going to be one of the higher, cash generators for us this season. So you just lock him in. He's just looking super juicy. And another thing that I wanted to point out was that he was pushing into the back stoppages. So starting on the centre half back line and pushing into stoppages as the ball bounced. So that even gives him more opportunity to get the ball on the back side of that as well. So lock him in, and I easily see him breaking that three digit figure in our forward lines and potentially being like F1 for the season. So lock him in, and you don't need to worry about him too much more. McKercher is another one that a lot of people were thinking about, and he played a mixture role of wing, half forward, half back. He was really just about everywhere on the field. Remind me a lot of a Nick Martin sort of role. So you can look at that two ways in terms of he's all over the ground, so he's going to have patches where he's quieter, which was evident in this match. I think in the first quarter he didn't have as many touches, but then he found his way into the back line every so often and just got a few plus sixes in quick recession. So I think that's just what he's going to do. He's a damaging kick. He even had a few shots on goal as well, being a half forward. So I just don't know if I could pay up, 82 fantasy. So I think it's like 800k or something like that, priced at 82. I don't think I could pay up for someone like that on a wing. But again, he did enough to say he's a pass mark. So if you're keen on him, put a tick on him and just see how he goes in the next couple of games to see if you're still keen on him and putting him in your back line there. Finn O'Sullivan is the last one I wanted to touch on quickly here, and that was that he is probably locked in to play a wing role for North Melbourne. He played in the A side as the full all-day winger on the left-hand side there for us, or closest to the camera, whatever you want to look at it as. So I'm locking him in a bench spot for me. I guess the question is he field worthy? And I'm not 100% sure. With wingers, they can be quite versatile in their scoring output, especially with North Melbourne, that they don't particularly use the wings that well. They play on quite smaller grounds like Marvel and whatnot, so they predominantly just go through the midfield, especially with their midfield depth that they have. They have plenty of decent guys just to run in slingshot in the half back there. So I'm not 100% sure what his output's going to be, but I can see him being pretty consistent with 50s to 60s and possibly even being closer to 70s. He did score a 62 in this game, in which was he did play a full-time wing role and did find himself in the forward half and the back half every now and then, just doing what wingers do and follow the ball back and forth. So pretty bullish on what he will do, and I think he's locked into that side. So probably just lock him into his side for now. A few other names I should quickly mention. Phillips obviously played really well, 104, but with Wardlaw coming back and obviously Simcombe due to come back very quickly, I think that pushes him out of that midfield rotation. He did have the most CBAs in this game, so 24, just ahead of Power with 23. So again, I expect him to get pushed out of that midfield mix quite quickly with those sort of guys coming back in the side. So it's a no for me. As much as he could be an option, I just don't think he's there just yet. LDU, I know he's been fantasy relevant in the past, but just scored a 60, just ticked over the legs. I don't think he's going to be anything great for us in terms of fantasy output, with Sheasel through the midfield now, and what's his name? Tom Powell and whatnot. So I think it's just going to be that sort of 80 to 90 guys. So I just don't think he's worth picking. He did some nice things where he went back and he took plenty of +6s back in the back half and also kicked a nice goal forward. So it seems like all the midfielders have quite a nice flexibility to run, play forward and play defense and be able to demand the ball back there. So be interesting to watch, but probably not one I'm looking to pay up for in a Luke Davies-Uniacke. I think that sort of does it for North Melbourne in that North Melbourne game. We'll now move on to the Western Bulldogs and Essendon Pracky match, which was the first real look of practice matches that was pretty nice to see. So we'll start with Western Bulldogs, I guess, in terms of their scoring output. So I guess some things I wanted to quickly mention is that we didn't see the likes of Marcus Bontempelli, Tom Liberatore. Adam Treloar obviously was out injured and he will be for the start of the season. Bailey Dale was an interesting one. Why he didn't play, I'm not 100% sure, but he didn't even make the squad, so maybe he's managing something, but we haven't got confirmation on that just yet. Jamari Ugahagan was dealing with some personal issues, and JJ's out injured as well. So there's quite a few names that would be in this side that we need to take into consideration when we're looking at these scores and the roles that they played. I guess the main takeaways from this game was that we're really looking at the main centre bounce. It was Sanders, Richards, and Kennedy being the mainstays in there for Western Bulldogs, with West and Garcia being the follow-up guys, rotating through there when others were on the bench. So, showed you that it's really a tussle-up with who's going to be that sort of third, fourth, and fifth midfielder for this team when, with the likes of Marcus Bontempelli and Liberatore coming back into the side. So it would have been nice to see them in there because it would give us a lot more insight onto, especially Sanders was the guy particularly I wanted to get some eyes on and get to see what his role is going to be because at the end of the day, they've got 4 or 5 midfielders that could go through there, and if he's not one of them, then that really limits what his fantasy output will be. But looking at his performance, I'm a lot more confident now that he's going to be sort of that the fourth midfielder, particularly with Treloar out to run through that midfield. So I think as ahead of a Kennedy, just looking at body language, it looked like they definitely preferred a Sanders run through there rather than a Kennedy, who may do jobs here and there based on where they need him. So that gave me a lot more confidence in what Sanders did. He looked really fit and looked a little bit more slimmer. So he was just a little bit cleaner with the ball in hand and, just looked a lot more confident with his body. So pretty keen on what he can do. And I think that pretty much locks him into my side now. I'll put a green tick next to his name, like I said. I probably want to see it at least one more time in the Community Series game to absolutely lock him in. But all the signs are showing green at this point in time. I like the upside. I think he can easily go close to 80 in this role. He scored an 83 in this game, playing full-time midfielder. But even if he was to play a lot of half forward in that sort of Jack McRae sort of role where it's a little bit of CBAs but mostly half forward, I think he's enough of a fantasy gun to be able to push his average up closer to 70, 75 like we saw Jack McRae do. So pretty bullish on what he can do. And he just looked like he was thirsty for the ball. He was always demanding for the ball, spreading in space. So, he's definitely one I'm locking in my side. As for the other the other main guys in there, Ed Richards probably was the main standout for me in there. He just had a lot of authority, his work rate around the ground. He kicked a nice goal and just got them plenty of the appeal around the ground. Like he scored 67 and he only played the first half. So he just shows you that he was absolutely dominant in that first half, just everywhere. So he had a lot of authority around the ground and just demanded the ball. So it'll be interesting to see what he does with the likes of Bontempelli and Liberatore back. Obviously, he'll probably be the main third member in that midfield, particularly with Treloar out. So it does make me a little bit more bullish in what he could do. But being a midfield-only player, priced at, I think he's priced at 92. I'll just double check that. Ed Richards, 86. So a little bit cheaper than what I thought, but I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of upside there for him. Would be nice if he was still a defender for us, but probably one I'm not super keen on looking at. But again, I'll keep an eye on him to see what his potential upside could be in this with the other guys in there. So keep an eye on that one. The other one was Matt Kennedy. Sorry, wrong Kennedy there. And I think I'm crossing him off now. Like being behind Sanders, being the fifth midfielder, it screams what he did at Colton, and he's just going to be that Mr. Fix-It guy where he does jobs every now and then. So I don't think he's one that we're going to pick, and I'm just crossing him off now, especially at his more expensive price as well. The other thing that we need to talk about is the elephant in the room, particularly the white elephant, and that is Tim English. Now, you guys are probably just as confused as I am, as he spent majority of this game up as a key forward, particularly in the first quarter. He didn't play any ruck time at all, realistically. So my best guess at why that was is that he's still managing his injury a little bit, and he is just managing it through it, so he's not playing his predominant role. The other factor is that they were looking at signing the SSP in Crossley, being the ruckman. He didn't get it signed in the end, so there's no concerns in his role. We know Tim English is going to be the number one ruck, so he didn't need to prove himself, and that's exactly why I wouldn't be phased by what he did. But he also didn't do enough to say that I should be convinced that I want to pick him or even consider picking him to start the season. Because when he did go on the ruck, it wasn't like he was absolutely dominating, and it looked like he had changed his rock craft like we sort of expect him to do, because he was getting dominated so heavily. And he wasn't really getting used around the ground as much as I would have expected in, a pracky match where, a lot of the guys on the outside do quite well. So I just think it was a mixture of he's still overcoming his injury. They're letting another guy have a run in it just to try to see if they can sign him, see what his potential is going to be. So I'm not concerned by it, but I'm also not impressed by it either. It's sort of just like a mess sort of thing. So I didn't really get too much more information out of that. He scored a 54 in the game, so one I'll just put a pass mark on for now and evaluate again next week. And I guess the other names I wanted to quickly mention here is a Joel Frazier. Obviously scored a massive 109 without the likes of Bailey Dale and JJ back there. He was just the main guy that absolutely demanded the ball, took all the kick-ins, and showed that he had plenty of authority back there to just demand the ball and be that main attacking defender, being the distributor. So I think he's going to be a mainstay in this side for Western Bulldogs for the year. And I really feel like he can improve his average. Like, he's priced at like 62, I believe, down here, 627k, 61, sorry. So I think he could easily bump up his average closer to an 80. I would like to see it with Bailey Dale, and unfortunately we're only going to get to see it with one more game. Hopefully Bailey Dale does play in that game. So one to definitely keep an eye on, because he can definitely improve his average, and we are struggling for those defenders that could jump up in average. So he could definitely be one that we slot into our defense there. And the other rookie that I wanted to mention was, I think his name's Sam Davidson. He played predominantly on a wing for Western Bulldogs, and he looked pretty good. Obviously scored 64. Didn't do anything amazing, but did okay to say, okay, he's potentially going to be an option for us on the wing. So just one to keep on the books and have another look again next week to see if that's the case when they bring a few more guys back into the side. Just scrolling through the list here, I don't think there's anyone really else to mention from my eyes. So we'll move on to the likes of Essendon. Now, there's a few more guys to go through for Essendon, as there was a few more names out that we need to talk about, and that was Parrish and Durham. So that changed their midfield mix quite a bit, and that's raised some eyebrows a fair bit. So the main midfield mix was Merritt, Caldwell, Sardis, and Hobbs. So obviously those last two guys are quite cheap in what they showed they could do in this game, because they're very fringe players and not always in the side. So just quickly touching on Merritt and Caldwell, they both just did their thing, continued on great form from late last year. Neither of them are probably starting relevant for me due to that round 4 bye. Caldwell could potentially have an argument to be, because he does present some value because he didn't play as a full-time midfielder all last season. So there's an argument to say he is a bit underpriced, but I don't think it's enough to say you can lock him in. I don't think he's going to get close enough to being a top 8 midfielder for us. So for those sort of reasons, I've just not even considered him. Sardis is where I wanted to start with, because he is very interesting. Obviously, I was pretty hot on him last year. Obviously, he's got very good junior numbers, don't get me wrong. The reason why he hasn't been on my watch list this preseason was just purely due to the Essendon midfield depth. You got Parrish, Merritt, Caldwell are the main guys you'd expect in there. Then they've been throwing in your Perkins, your Setterfields, your Durhams, and even a few other guys in there as well. So there's just so many guys that can run through that midfield. You know, Shields was another one that was running through there last year. So there's so many guys that can run through there. I just don't know how Sardis can break into the side and be one of those mainstay guys. And I guess that's where the flags start with me is Parrish and Durham are going to be one of the mainstay guys there. So you have to absolutely consider that when you're looking at this. And I wouldn't be too reactionary to just jump on this, the fact that he scored, a 79. He's very lowly priced of 600, I think it was. I'll bring that up real quick. Yeah, he's priced exactly 600, so 58 break even there. The other thing that concerns me is that he's a very fringe player. He only played 7 games last season. He played predominantly wing in those games, so and he couldn't really hold his spot. And it's particularly now with the likes of Nick Martin going back to that wing role and being that sort of, high work rate player that can play all over the ground. It doesn't take much for the likes of a Sardis to be okay. He plays round 1, or he plays round 0. We select him round 1. He's in the midfield, but then they want to change a few things up, or a Parrish now comes back from injury. They now take Sardis out, and then you've got a huge risk of him being dropped from the side because I don't see him playing any other position besides midfield in the team. It doesn't seem like he has much of a forward craft, and obviously he couldn't make the wing work, and they've got the wings already locked out with Dersma and now Martin. So it can be very risky because he would be out of the side very quickly. So at that 600 price tag, it is one to watch, but probably very unlikely in the bottom of my watch list at this point in time. Obviously, like I said, he does have elite junior numbers, and if he can get a role, then absolutely he'd be one that I'd very quickly lock away, even with this round 4 bye, just because he does have so much upside in what he can do if he was to get that role. So keep an eye on him, but it is very unlikely to come off of it. I wouldn't be too reactionary with this pick. Same with this next guy in Dylan Shields. I think I said that right. He really caught the eyes of people. Obviously, we knew he was changing to this halfback role. It's been widely spoken about all preseason, but I guess people didn't expect him to go as well as he did. Took a lot more kick-ins. I think the thing that concerns me the most about him was that while he did some nice things and he had a nice fantasy output, like he scored a 91, or sorry, yeah, where was he? A 94, sorry. A lot of that came in the second half when they sort of dropped a lot of their mainstay guys, like a Redmond didn't play the second half, and that's when he really started to see a lot more of the plus sixes come into his possession and took a lot more kick-ins. I think he only had 1 kick-in in the first half and took 4 more in the second half, so shows you that with Redmond, he's a worse player than what he showed in the second half. So I would be very wary of picking him due to that fact. So don't just be fooled by, okay, he scored 94, that's what he's going to do. Particularly at his price range of 75, 20 points upside at most. The other thing, again, with a Sardis, very similar to Sardis, is that he probably doesn't play any other position if he doesn't play this role. This is probably his last-ditch effort to be a cement guy to play AFL. Oops. So I don't think it's going to be a locked-in role for him. Obviously, he's probably fringe at best. He has made a lot of mistakes with his distribution. So, and we saw that during the game. While he did some nice things, he also missed a fair few targets and butchered it. So, it only takes one bad match for him to be dropped, and then you've got a 700, 800k guy that's a forced trade in your hands. So, I'm not being tricked by this one. I think it's far too expensive at his price. And he's too much of a risk of being dropped with a bad performance. So I'm just avoiding him at this stage. But he did enough to say that he's a pass mark for this game. So if you were keen on him, put a tick next to his name and see how he goes in the next couple games leading up to round 1. The other guy we want to talk about is Isaac. Not Isaac. Just Kaku. I don't remember his first name now. But he scored a 49. He was very lively up forward, did a few nice things, had a few shots at goal. Probably got, a dozen of touches or so. So he had a pretty fairly good game. Only scored the 49 though, so that's probably what you're going to expect from him in most games. He's not going to be a huge fantasy output for us, but he is definitely going to be a lock for their best 22. So if we don't have other guys that have more of a fantasy output, then he's definitely one that I can block away, being best 22 and just being a slow burn. But I'd prefer to look at other people first. And a few other rookies that I wanted to mention. Hassan El Houli is very unlikely to start. He played all day on the wing and really didn't do too much. Obviously, just a 42. Jackson Pryor scored a 41, played 3 quarters. As a bit more of a more expensive defender, I think there's like 360k or something like that. So I don't know how much of upside he's going to have at that elevated price range. So I'm not super keen on that one. And Zach Reed, 38, mainly played in the first half. Got plenty of +6s back then, but then didn't really do too much else. Really, they were just looking for that Ridley replacement. Is one of them going to be there? I'd probably say yes. Zach Reed is obviously a super risky. He's only played 10 games in the last 4 seasons, so he really needs to have a good run at it to be worthwhile pick. Obviously, basic price for us, but definitely ones to keep an eye on, and enough to say that they tick the right box, and you can watch them in the next couple games to see how they go. And I think that sort of does it. I don't think there's anyone else I really wanted to mention. I guess Setterfield only played the 4th quarter, so it's pretty confident that he will no longer be in the main side. So that's something we probably already knew, but something that we had earmarked here and there. Besides that, really not really too much else to mention here. Hobbs, I don't think is relevant. Again, he has probably shown more of a ability to play half forward like we saw a lot last season. So he is, what is he priced at? I think he is forward eligible as well. So he's 498k, so 49 break even. Forward status, definitely interesting. If he can become sort of the half forward with a bit of midfield mix, then definitely would be a little bit more enticing. I just need to see it with the likes of Parrish and Durham in the side, because I don't think he's going to get that many CBAs in the side if that is the case. Like, he had 14 in today's game. Oh, sorry, not today, but in this game. So keep that in mind. But we'll move on to the next game, which is the Freo and All-Stars Indigenous match. I guess I can probably move over to DFS here, where they do have these stats. So really, I'm only looking at the Freo in the side. And before I get into those guys, I just really wanted to say how good was this match. It really felt like footy was back. It was real footy. It was fast. It was exciting. And it really hit that itch that we all sort of needed after a long off break. So it was great to see. Hopefully everyone else enjoyed it. But realistically, in this match, I was only purely looking at Fremantle, because that, again, was they're all playing most likely the side that are going to have in round 1, with a few names missing, with like a Young didn't play, or Luke Ryan didn't play. Shea Bolton was in the All-Stars game, and same with Walter. So there was a fair few guys that were out that we need to sort of see a little bit more, and that gave a bit more opportunity to a few more guys. But I guess to start off with a few of the main takeaways, starting with the 2 main midfield boys and Brayshaw and Sarong. Brayshaw was was pretty quiet early. I think he only had 3 touches in the first quarter, even though he played most of the first quarter there. So he got off to a pretty slow start, whereas Sarong had 8 touches in the first quarter and slowed late. He also spent a bit of time forward, so that is a bit interesting. He played as a deep forward and even took a few marks and had a few kicks at goal. Did unfortunately miss both of them, but both of those boys did enough just to tick the box to say that they did the job. And if you were keen on starting either one of them, then they did enough to say, okay, we're good to go. Ticked over the legs. Again, was very minimal tackles, so you'd expect that to jump up a fair bit. Brayshaw had 4 tackles and Strong only had 2. I'd expect that to jump up a fair bit more when the season actually starts and the intensity is a lot higher. So they did enough to tick the box, right? So probably enough to give you no concerns on their role. O'Driscoll was the man on everyone's lips after this game, and watching as he went through this, because he was trying his absolute nut off. He was spreading so quickly off that wing and just was finding him everywhere along the field. So he ended up with 107 fantasy points, 17 disposals, 10 marks, 6 tackles. He just did it quite simply very easily. And what he's priced at is just undeniable when you think about what he is potentially going to do. But he is a classic guy that benefits from these practice matches because the intensity is not there. There's a lot of space on the outside. A lot of these guys on the outside get a lot of these extra points that they probably wouldn't have got previously. Like 10 marks is definitely not sustainable. So I'm definitely not expecting him to average, 100. I think a realistic number for him is 75, or a 70 is pretty average for a winger. So that's definitely in the question. It's just the only question mark is it enough to pay up for his 441k price tag? When you're thinking of, rookies that are 100k less, but also capable of going 70 as well. And for me, the job security, if he can prove that he is best 22 ahead of the likes of Jago Hamira, who has typically been that other winger for them, then I'd lock it in. Just to say that, he's going to jump up in price tag and he has that job security over the likes of those other rookies that we're not 100% sure on just yet. But if that's not proven, not confirmed in the next game or two, then I definitely I may just stick with a rookie instead because they have this very similar output. But rookies will have more of a cash generation output for that because there's 100k difference. So definitely one I'm interested in, and yeah, definitely one I want to keep an eye on because I have floated that he may be in my team here and there. But yeah, I want to see more in the next game or two. The Freo Rucks was pretty interesting as well, with Reedy seemingly being the predominant ruck in the CBAs for them this year, with Jackson playing as a full forward, which was a bit surprising. I guess not super surprising. We had heard of things like that previously. But the other surprising thing was that Jackson actually spent time as a midfielder in the CBAs as well, which was very, very weird to see. But he did some nice things, but that pretty much crosses Jackson off for me. He only scored the 51, kicked 2 goals. So he didn't do much. He's not going to have enough upside for me at that higher price tag like we would have thought. But I guess Reedy probably needs more of that discussion because he does present as a value option for us as a ruckman. I'll quickly bring up his numbers here. Not Hobbs. So he is 402k ruckman. So priced down at 39, and with Sean Darcy being out for 3 to 5 weeks to start the season, could he be this potential R3 option for us if the likes of a Harry Boyd isn't named for St Kilda? With Rowan Marshall likely to be ready for round 1. Could he just be a quick cash grab option? If you have him for the first 3 weeks, see what Sean Darcy does when he comes back in. Does that drop a Reedy and he can make 100 or 150k? If he can average 50s or closer to 60s. He did only manage the 79 score in this game, and that was against Livingstone, who I guess none of us have really seen much from him. He's probably the third or fourth ruckman at West Coast, so really not up against any significant sort of ruck opposition. So would have probably expected a lot more, in any decent fantasy ruckman would have absolutely dominated and probably put a 120 on his head. So I think his upside is very limited, but I could see him being a pretty quick cash grab if we were looking for that R3 green dot, and I could see him being that quite simply to start the season. So definitely one I want to keep an eye on. I would like to see what he can do against a proper opposition player, ruckman. So we'll keep a big eye on him in the next game. Quickly, the other one I want to touch on was Erasmus and Johnson. Both did okay without being amazing. Really, they really had very minimal impact. So I don't think they're really done enough to prove themselves to be in their best 22. With the likes of Young coming back into the side and Fife also missing. So those two definitely are definitely better than Erasmus and Johnson. So I don't think I'm keen on picking either of those. I know a few people ask me about Erasmus, so there's your answer. I've crossed him off in my preseason calculations. Whereas the All-Stars, all I was really looking at them for is their fitness, really. You can't confirm their roles because they're not obviously playing in their own side, and things are going to be very different. Simpkins a pretty good example of that. He played full-time midfield mix and got 30 disposals. And we know exactly what he could do in that midfield if he is that main midfield guy. I even sneakily had a multi on that had him for 30 plus disposals, and luckily that did hit, but the rest of my multi did let me down. So we just know he's not going to have this main midfield role at North Melbourne. So there's real no point looking at what he did in this game. We just know that he's fit and healthy and is firing at this point in time. So if you were keen on him as a forward option, as a sort of a 50-50 midfield forward option at North, then go for it. He ticks the box, but I don't think we're looking at that too much. The guys that I was particularly pleased with was Jason Horne-Francis, even though I've been pretty down on him all this preseason being overpriced. He definitely did prick my ears up a fair bit that he looked super fit. He looked like he slimmed down a fair bit to the eye. He was mega in the first half where he kicked 3 goals and spent majority of the first half in the CBAs. But then in the second half, he went to full forward, and that's when he really dropped off a fair bit. So he just had very well-rounded stats, 17 disposals, 5 marks, 6 tackles. So definitely one that I'll continue to watch. Haven't written him off yet in terms of a starting pick. I just like a few others a bit more in terms of upside. I want to see it with the likes of Rosie and Butters alongside him, what that's going to look like. The other one I was looking at was Rankin. He probably didn't impress me as much. He looked like he had very minimal impact and really looked like he was just sooking the entire time. He missed a few set shots at goal and really just wasn't able to have the impact that he was looking for. So I don't think I could watch him in my team all season being that Suki Lala. So I'm probably not super keen on it at this point in time, but I will also be looking at him in the practice match against Port on Friday night. So big watch on him. As we know, he's potentially going into a full-time midfield role, and that's what he sort of did in this game. Did have some managed minutes here and there, so it wasn't super, all time in there, but I don't think he always will be. Wangani Milera was another one I was pretty keen to watch. He was on my side at the time, and he still is on my side at the moment, but he was surprisingly underwhelming. He didn't have a huge amount of influence off halfback with, the likes of Impey, Amon, and Humphreys being the main distributors off halfback, so that took away from what his ability was. And he also ended up as being listed as injured, as you can see, the injury sign, on 58% game time. So I haven't really heard exactly what his injury was, if there was an injury at all. So I'm waiting to hear on what that potential is, but I'm not reading into it too much just yet. It hasn't come out just yet, so I don't think it's anything to be worried about. And for that reason, I haven't removed him from my side just yet. Probably just a pass mark in terms of his fitness. He was doing some nice things, but wasn't the cumulative best that I sort of thought he would be in this side. Humphreys was that main guy. He scored 78. He looked really good, and he could be a really decent pick for the Cats. So one I'll keep an eye on in this preseason. That probably does it for that game. We've got 2 more to go through. Oops. Don't do that. Okay, we'll just quickly try and find the scores for the worst game of the weekend, which was the Tigers and the Eagles. So here it is. So luckily, this was the most shocking game you could ever see. It was so scrappy. It was very poor skills, and luckily there was only three sessions of it. So 3 25-minute sessions. So quickly, some notable absences that were in the side. So for Richmond, there was so many. They pretty much had their entire side out of the field. So you had Taranto, you had Hopper, you had Blostone, you had Jane Short, you had Nankervis, you had Broad, and you had Lynch. So all of their mainstay guys and all their different lines were all out. So it made it really hard to really determine what these guys' roles are going to be to start the season. But we'll do our best to sort of translate what that could be. So in terms of who did well and who didn't do well, all the main takeaways, Lawler, I got to start with Lawler's injury, obviously. The news has come out recently that he has had a fractured jaw. He sustained that in the last quarter of this game where the likes of, what's his name? Jinby pushed him into a contest, and unfortunately he has now fractured his jaw and is potentially missing the first 4 weeks of the season. So Unfortunately, that does mean that he is probably out of our sides unless news drastically changes in that time frame. He will not be playing in next week's Community Series game, so you can probably cross him off, and he'll provide a decent downgrade option for us when he comes back from injury. The other thing that I really was really excited about was the Tigers' game style. That it was pretty dominant, pretty evident that the Tigers were happy just to slow down the play, have a bit of a build up, and chip it around the halfback. So that really boosted my confidence with the likes of a Shaw, of Lostone, and any rookies that are back there, like a Jacob Blight, who was a main beneficiary of this game style in this game particularly. He was just solid down back, intercepting well. Priced at 421k as a defender, could be another super cheap guy as our sort of D6 if we're not getting any other guys that come through, or even a D5 option for us if a Shawmaker doesn't get up, particularly from in my side. He just had 10 marks and 16 disposals off halfback, and I just see that continuing. I think he's going to stay in this side. So he's definitely one I'm pretty keen to watch in this preseason game in the Community Series. So big watch on him. The other things, I guess, in terms of Richmond, it was super hard to sort of determine. Like, there's no real mainstay guys. Like, Campbell had a lot of time in the midfield, but didn't score particularly well, so I'm not super keen on what he could do. Their midfield mix was very, very spread. Ryan was the main ruckman. Ross was the main, bigger body in there for them. So it's really hard to determine what their scores are going to be. Lawler did play a lot 50-50 forward and CBA, so when he comes back from injury, I would expect him to play that sort of role as a fourth midfielder behind the likes of Taranto, Hopper, Prestia, and he'll be that fourth one that rotates through there. So that gives me a bit more confidence on what his role is going to be. But besides that, we weren't really too much on anyone else. Cozzy looked okay back there as a defender, as a forward eligible pick for us, but I don't think I'm going there at all. So I think that sort of pretty much does it for the Tigers. We'll move on to the much more relevant Eagles, who played a much more predominant side. For the Eagles, I guess we've got to start at the top, and that was Liam Baker. We got confirmation of this halfback role. He pushed into the back of stoppages off the back of CBAs. However, it was far from an impressive performance in my eyes. He really struggled to get his hands on the ball and really didn't show this demand and thirst for the footy like we have seen with, a Sheasel or even Caleb Daniel from North Melbourne. They just didn't show that passion to get the ball. So he really struggled there. So it far from impressed me and really put him down in terms of my expectation of him. So I'm a little bit less bullish on what his output could be. So I really want him in next game to show that he wants the ball in his hands. Hopefully it was just a fake case that, practice game, he's best 22 no matter what. He can just go out there, roll over the legs, not get an injury, and be good to go for round one. I want to see a lot more in this next game. It was a very scrappy game as well, and the fact that Tigers really struggled to get the ball in the forward line could have meant that it didn't give him a lot of opportunity. So I need to see a lot more, but he is fading in my opinion as we speak, and he only scored the 38 in the game, the 3 quarters of that game. So that's very, very poor for what we would expect, especially paying up 800k for that sort of player. His teammate in Jack Graham was far more impressive, playing in a full CBA role. You can see he scored a 57 in these 3 quarters. So that gives me a lot more confidence that he has a lot more upside in what he's priced at 65, I believe. Quickly go over. Oops, wrong one. Yeah, he's priced at 65, at 662k. He just played a predominant midfield role all day in there. You can see he was the number 1 CBA taker in front of Duggan, who I probably should have mentioned that also played a lot of CBAs. But with the likes of Tim Kelly drew back, Yo back from injury at some point early in the season. Reed didn't play in this game as well. It's going to be an interesting mix, but I think Graham brings that defensive pressure around the ball, particularly with Yo out for the first part of the season. I think he can have a pretty big bump in there, and I think he can average closer to 80 to 85, so I'm pretty bullish on what he can do to start the season. Again, priced at 65, that's enough to get him off to a fly and get him some cash generation to go off start of the season. So again, pretty bullish on him, but I do want to see it again with those other guys in the side. But he's definitely got a big tick next to his name for this game. The other highly owned guy that I want to talk about was Hewitt. Now, he did okay. He wasn't massive. I can't just find his name. There he is. Only scored a 22. He played predominantly as a midfielder today. Played 10, had 10 CBAs. He did some nice things. Kicked a nice goal on the run. And I guess the question is, with Reed and Kelly back, does that push him out of the CBAs? It more than likely does and pushes them forward. So that probably limits his fantasy output. So he's by far not locked into my side at this point in time. But in terms of what he did in this match, it was enough to give him a pass mark to say that he's best 22, but his scoring is very limited in my opinion. So definitely want to keep that in the notebook over the next couple of weeks. Bo Allen was another one that we need to keep an eye on. He was very quiet from what I could tell, and it was hard to really tell because of the quality of the stream being so far zoomed out, and he was obviously very far off the halfback. The ball really struggled to get into the Tigers forward 50, so we didn't probably get to see as much of him as I would have liked and what I'm expecting to have in the actual fantasy game, in the AFL season. So I do need to see it again before I lock him in my side, so keep an eye on that one, but I'll give him an okay mark in that one. And finally, Jack Hutchinson was another one that people had flagged could be a potential option for us. He scored a 25. Did some okay things, he's potentially looking at a vacant wing role over there. He looked solid, but didn't really have a huge amount of fantasy output, only scored the 25. So I need to see it again. I need to see more. Probably not enough to lock him in my side at this point in time, and probably a little bit down on what he could do because he is an elevated price at I think 380k, I want to say. 385k. So yeah, it would take a bit for him to lock into my side at this point in time. Hopefully that gives you some insight on that game on the Tigers and the West Coast Eagles, and that moves us into the final game, the main showstopper, the Hawks and the Geelong game. If I can quickly find their stats. So we'll start with the Cats because they've got some pretty big names in there. Now, the main takeaways I guess I got from this game was that Holmes looked absolutely elite in this game. He looks like he's taking on a full-time midfield role now, whereas last year he played a lot of this 50-50 role. So that does have a little bit more of... It does play into my calculations a little bit more. I thought he'd be pretty dominant on the halfback, but now he's moving into a full-time midfield role. He looked elite in there. Did not leave CBAs all day. Did not play in the fourth. And he was on track for a 130. So he scored a 103 in 3 quarters. Just shows you that he was absolutely everywhere in this game. Same with Myers. He did very well and even floated to the back line. And it just shows you again that these guys that are really good at spreading and getting into space really do well in these practice matches because the intensity isn't there. But if you were keen on these guys, they'd get an absolute big tick and they definitely should be considered in your side to start the season. Definitely not super keen on Myers just because of the high price tag. Holmes is a different calculation because one world I can see him being closer to a top 6 defender for us with this much better role. But he is also priced at a lot higher at, I think, 94. I'll quickly bring that up. Geelong, yeah, he's the most expensive. He's priced at 94, 969k. So it's definitely one I want to keep an eye on. I was pretty bullish on him last year. I think he does have a bit more upside. Just that early buy is a bit frustrating, especially with the likes of Mills and Perryman already in our back line. I don't know if I can fit a third one in, but there definitely is potential for that. The other guy that I wanted to mention, obviously Bailey Smith, did pretty well, enough to give him a tick that to say that he's fit and ready to go. Nothing outrageous in terms of his fantasy output because he scored a 58, but he predominantly just played on the wing. Didn't play a huge amount of CBAs in this game. I can show you that he's played 5 CBAs of 21. Obviously, didn't play the fourth quarter. So I think it's enough at his price range. You're just locking him in no matter what. I don't think you need to see too much from him. We just wanted to see that he's fit and firing, and that he's going to be a decent pick for us at that cheaper price. Sam De Koning was the interesting one in the first half, particularly. He played as the main ruck, which wasn't very surprising with Stanley coming in the second half after that. So that sort of gives you a bit more confidence that Sam De Koning is going to be the main ruck for Geelong to start this season. But again, Geelong are just so scary in that sort of sense that they've never really had this ruckman that just locks down and takes that full 75% ruck time. So I do want to see it again. Obviously, we get 2 more matches with the Community Series game and the preseason game, the round 0. So if he can continue this form, then he is passing all the marks and could potentially start as a defender for us in the back line. Again, the round 3 buy is concerning, but at that price range, he can easily push 90, 95 as a full-time ruckman, so that's too juicy not to pass up if he does take that role, even if it is for a short period of time to start the season. So definitely one I want to keep an eye on to start the season. What other main guys did I want to talk about in this one? Zach Guthrie did the usual thing. O'Sullivan did pretty well as a cheaper defender for us. I'm not sure exactly what price he's at because he's more of a key defender. I don't think I'm really looking at him. But if we're struggling for defender options, he's another one that could come into calculations. We know what Geelong like to do with their defensive half, where they like to chip it around a fair bit and play that slower game style. So definitely plays into your calculations about picking this sort of player. Mitch Nevitt was another one that played all day and played in midfield predominantly. So he definitely is one that we need to keep an eye on. Scored 72. I think he's very, very cheap at 431k. So again, that's sort of a Driscoll sort of price that has put up a very decent score. Only played the 4 games last season. And has shown plenty of talent. Did some nice things back there in the midfield. So definitely one to keep an eye on. I'm not super confident just off that one game though. I do need to see a lot more. We've seen the likes of Clark go through their last preseason, and we all sort of got picked forward to picking him as a bench rookie, and that didn't pay out. So I'd really need to be confident paying up for this 431k midfielder to be on field and be able to score quite nicely. So he needs to have that upside of possibly an 80, I'd say, to be a worthwhile pick. Stewart, I think we saw enough to cross him off. He had some CBAs, but not enough. And off a halfback, he really didn't demand the ball as much as what we would expect from him. But again, he's probably just ticking over the legs with his older age. Just looking at the Koning score, he only had the 34, even though he did play a lot of that main midfield role or main ruck role. So definitely a little bit concerning, but again, we will watch and see what happens in there. But I guess that sort of does it for the Geelong Cats. We've talked about all the relevant players in there. We'll move over to the Hawks, if I can find the right one. And I guess we'll start at the top in Mackenzie. He does look like he potentially has a bit of a breakout year. I know a lot of people were hot on him last year. I know like Mitch started him. So he definitely has the potential to be a breakout candidate this year. He's obviously an elite player, a high draftee, and has been made comparisons to the likes of Sam Mitchell. Very similar player where he's very silky and that smaller player. So I could see a world where he starts to get some more introduction into the midfield role, particularly with the likes of Day potentially spending more time forward every now and then. But their main midfield mix is going to stay as Nash, Warple, Newcomb, and Day. I just don't see how that's going to change. It would really be when one of them's either resting or resting forward, then the likes of a Mackenzie comes in and does some midfield rotations. I don't think there's a huge amount of upside there. I need to go to the right page here. McKerchief, I can spell his name, 589k, so he's a bit more pricey at that at 58k, 58 price tag. So you'd probably need him to push 80 to be a worthwhile pick as a forward. And I just don't know if I see that only having very limited time in the CBA. So he's probably going to play as more of a half forward winger and potentially being a fringe player for us. So I don't think he's one I'm considering at this point in time, but again, keep him on your watch list. Day, I'll just start there. He absolutely killed it. He scored 76, did not play the last quarter. He had like 4 or 5 shots at goal in this game. He could have absolutely kicked the bag. He just looks so fit and healthy, and he's primed to be a good mid pricer for us. So I think I'm locking him in my side at this point in time. He did spend a fair bit of time in the forward line in this game, but I don't expect that to be too much in the actual AFL season, just because in this game he's a best 22. They're probably just giving a few other guys in there a run through. Looking at the CBA spread, you had McKenzie, you had Ward through there, you had Huswaite, you had Moore, all those sort of guys that run through there. I don't think that's going to be super consistent. I think it'll be a lot tighter in the season. So I have no concerns for Day at this point in time. He just looked absolutely amazing, and I think he can push that back up to 90, 95 quite simply. Who else was on the list? Anyone that was interested in Newcomb, he did what he normally does in pre-seasons and just absolutely hammers it. I am not touching him this preseason. I'm not falling for that again. If you're looking at Lloyd Meek, he scored particularly well in 3 quarters, 93. He could definitely have a bit of a breakout year, being a bit more solidified as that main ruckman for us. He's shown plenty of potential to be a pretty good scorer. Sicily did some nice things. He did spend a lot of time down back and took a lot of kick-ins. You can see those here. He took 4 kick-ins. It was pretty widely spread along a lot of players back there, but he did spend a lot of time forward as well when Gunston particularly went into when he rested. So that is a little bit concerning. I don't think it'll be a mainstay for him to be as a forward. So but it's enough to concern me and flag me away from starting him as a pick. So there's that one. Conor McDonald did okay. 53. He did some nice things, but again, probably no one's really looking at him. And I really think that's about all we really had for these sort of guys. I don't think anyone else was really relevant in terms of fantasy. So that really pretty much does it for all the games that we saw so far. We're halfway through. We've got another 5 coming up later this week and this weekend. So again, I'll give you guys another review episode early next week, probably Monday. So stay tuned for that. Until then, hopefully you guys enjoy the footy back, and I will catch you guys then. Peace. Bye.